The sun beamed down on Central Park, where the weekend buzzed with families, joggers, and the distant laughter of children. Marcus Hale, dressed casually in jeans, a yellow t-shirt, and a dark brown leather jacket, held out his arms with a playful grin. "You can't catch me, Lily," he teased, darting away with a lightheartedness that belied his usual composed demeanor. Lily's laughter bubbled up as she chased him, her straight dark hair bouncing with each step. She was a small whirlwind of energy, determined to catch her father. "I'm gonna get you, Daddy," she shouted between giggles, sprinting faster. For Marcus, moments like these were treasures, a break from his hectic life as a tech entrepreneur, and more importantly, a reminder of why he worked so hard. But then, Lily's playful scream, loud and high-pitched, echoed across the park. It was the kind of sound that could easily be mistaken for distress by someone who didn't know better. And someone did. "Hey! Step away from the child. Get on the ground." The authoritative voice boomed across the open space, instantly freezing Marcus in place. He turned to see a bald police officer, stocky and stern, sprinting toward them with one hand hovering dangerously close to his holster. Confusion swept over Marcus's face, quickly replaced by concern as Lily clung to his leg, frightened by the sudden shift in tone. "Daddy, what's happening?" she whimpered, her small hands gripping his jacket. Marcus held up his hands, instinctively trying to de-escalate the situation. "This is my daughter. We're just playing, there's no need for this," he said, his voice calm but tinged with urgency. The officer, now close enough to see Marcus's face, ignored his explanation. "I said get on the ground," he barked, his eyes narrowed with suspicion. To him, Marcus wasn't a father enjoying time with his child, he was something more sinister, something his instincts told him he needed to control. A crowd began to gather, drawn by the escalating scene. Murmurs rippled through the onlookers, fueled by assumptions. "That little girl looked scared," someone whispered. "Is he really her father?" another questioned, their eyes darting between Marcus and the officer. The situation spiraled as Marcus found himself at a crossroads. He could comply, knowing it might traumatize Lily even more, or he could stand firm, hoping reason would break through the officer's prejudice. His mind raced as he glanced down at Lily, her tearful eyes searching his for reassurance. With a deep breath, Marcus straightened his posture and looked the officer in the eye. "There's no crime here," he stated firmly, keeping his hands raised but refusing to lie down. "We're a family. I'm her father." The tension crackled in the air, thick with the weight of unspoken histories and prejudices. The officer, clearly not convinced, reached for his radio. "I need backup at Central Park, potential child abduction in progress," he reported, his gaze never leaving Marcus. Tears welled up in Lily's eyes as the officer's words sank in. She tugged at Marcus's sleeve, her voice trembling. "Daddy, don't let them take you away." Marcus's heart clenched, but before he could respond, another voice cut through the crowd, a commanding presence that exuded confidence. "Officer, stand down. You're making a huge mistake." All eyes turned to see a woman in a tailored suit marching forward with purpose. Her sharp gaze was fixed on the officer, her phone already recording the scene. Miss Callahan, a well-known attorney and family friend, was exactly the ally Marcus needed at this moment. The officer hesitated, thrown off balance by the sudden intervention. "Who are you?" he demanded, though his aggressive stance wavered. "This is Marcus Hale, CEO of Hale Tech, and more importantly, he's Lily's father, Ms. Callahan declared, her voice laced with restrained anger. "You're harassing an innocent family. Back off, or you'll be facing a lawsuit you won't soon forget." The crowd's murmurs shifted, some recognizing Marcus's name, while others whispered about the unfolding drama. But Officer Daniels, still gripped by his suspicions, wasn't ready to let go. His hand remained near his holster, his eyes flicking between Marcus and Ms. Callahan, torn between the instinct to assert control and the growing doubt creeping into his mind. Lily, still holding tight to Marcus's leg, buried her face in his jacket, her small voice barely audible as she whimpered, "I want to go home." The standstill seemed endless as the crowd held its breath, waiting for the next move. Marcus's jaw clenched as he realized that this moment could either end peacefully or explode into something far worse, all because of a distorted perception of reality. He tightened his arm around Lily, silently vowing that no matter what, he wouldn't let this fear define their day. The officer took a step back, his uncertainty growing with each passing second. "Miss." Callahan pressed her advantage, her voice cutting like a scalpel. "Last chance, officer. Either back down, or I'll make sure you're the headline tomorrow." Marcus held his breath, hoping reason would prevail. As the tension in the park hovers on a knife's edge, Marcus's mind drifts back, unbidden, to the moments that led him here. His grip tightens protectively around Lily's small hand, but in the silence that stretches between him, the officer, and the gathering crowd, memories start to flood his thoughts. It had been a rainy day when Marcus first walked into the adoption agency's office. He remembered the nervous flutter in his chest as he and his late wife, Caroline, sat across from the adoption counselor. They'd been waiting for this moment for what felt like forever. When the counselor finally smiled and said, "We think we've found the perfect match for you," it was as if the world stopped for a second. The door opened, and in walked a bright-eyed baby girl with dark, straight hair and a wide smile. Marcus's heart swelled with emotion the moment their eyes met. Caroline squeezed his hand. "She's perfect," she whispered, tears brimming in her eyes. Marcus had nodded, unable to find words, but already knowing that this little girl was meant to be their daughter. The sound of Lily's first steps echoed in Marcus's mind. It had been a day filled with joy and laughter. He'd crouched down, arms wide open, as Lily toddled toward him on unsteady legs. "Come on, baby girl. You got this," he cheered, his heart thudding with pride. When she finally stumbled into his arms, he swept her up and spun her around, her giggles lighting up the room. Moments like these were the ones Marcus held onto during the tough times, the times when people's stares and whispers followed them wherever they went. He had always known that being a black man raising a white child would draw attention, but the looks, the judgment, the assumptions, they were things he hadn't fully anticipated. And yet, every time he looked at Lily's face, every time she called him daddy, he knew none of that mattered. Not long ago, they'd been walking past a playground when Marcus overheard a conversation between two mothers sitting on a bench. "Why is that little girl with him?" one whispered, casting a suspicious glance in his direction. The other mother nodded, her voice low but dripping with doubt. "It just doesn't seem right, does it?" Marcus had felt the familiar sting of their words, but he ignored it, focusing on Lily's joy as she skipped ahead, oblivious to the ugliness around her. He'd long ago learned to mask his discomfort, but it was Caroline's death that had truly taught him to shield his daughter from the world's harshness. After losing her to a sudden illness 2 years ago, Marcus had vowed to be both mother and father, protector and provider, for their daughter. But moments like that day at the playground always reminded him that society's gaze was never far behind, ready to judge what it didn't understand. The flashback snapped back to the present as Marcus feels Lily's hand tremble in his grasp. "Daddy," she whispers, pulling him out of his reverie. "Miss." Callahan's sharp voice cuts through the murmurs of the crowd. "This is racial profiling, plain and simple," she declares, her eyes blazing with righteous anger. But her words only seem to fuel Officer Daniel's stubbornness. His posture is rigid, his grip on his belt tight. The crowd, however, is beginning to shift. Doubt starts to creep into the minds of those watching. Some recognize Marcus's name and begin whispering to one another. Hale Tech, the multimillion-dollar tech company that Marcus built from the ground up, was well known in the city. "Wait, that's Marcus Hale," someone mutters, the disbelief evident in their tone. "He's the CEO?" But for every mind that begins to see the situation for what it is, there are others still clouded by preconceived notions. "But why was the little girl screaming?" someone else questions, clinging to their initial suspicion. Officer Daniels, feeling the pressure from all sides, doubles down. "Look, I just need to verify what's going on here. We can't take any chances when a child's safety is at risk," he insists, his tone less aggressive but still laced with doubt. It's clear he's not fully convinced. His bias is making it hard for him to see the situation objectively. Marcus fights back the surge of frustration rising within him. This isn't the first time he's had to deal with people who jump to conclusions based on how he looks. But this time, it's different. Lily is right here, and her innocent trust is being shattered by this unnecessary confrontation. The thought of her carrying this fear, of this moment marking her childhood, sends a wave of determination through him. But as the scene continues to unfold, it's clear that things are far from resolved. Officer Daniels' refusal to let go of his suspicions is setting the stage for an even more intense confrontation, one that could have consequences none of them are ready for. Officer Daniels' jaw tightens as he locks eyes with Marcus. The tension between them is almost tangible now, a silent standoff filled with unspoken history. Miss Callahan steps closer, sensing the officer's hesitation, her tone unwavering. This ends now. I've already captured enough footage of this interaction. You've made an unfounded accusation based purely on assumptions, and the longer you drag this out, the worse it's going to be for you. But Daniels isn't ready to back down just yet. You can't expect me to walk away from a situation like this without verifying everything, he retorts, his voice edging into defensiveness. The girl screamed. People are watching. I have a duty to protect her. Marcus's patience is wearing thin. He keeps his eyes fixed on the officer, but his focus remains on Lily, who is gripping his hand like it's her lifeline. He can feel her trembling. The weight of what's happening isn't lost on her, and that's what tears at him the most. Her young mind, still so innocent, is now being forced to process something ugly, something no child should have to understand. Taking a slow, measured breath, Marcus makes a decision. You want verification? Fine, he says, his voice calm but carrying an undercurrent of resolve. I'll show you our documents. But you're not getting them without me making it clear that this situation never needed to reach this point. He reaches for his wallet with deliberate, careful movements, not wanting to give Officer Daniels any excuse to escalate things further. The crowd's murmurs grow louder as they watch the unfolding drama, some with phones still recording, others simply staring in silent judgment. Marcus retrieves a small family photo, one of him, Lily, and Caroline from happier times, and hands it to Ms. Callahan, who presents it to the officer. Daniels takes the photo, his eyes flicking between the image and the man standing before him. It's a picture-perfect moment of a family full of love, Marcus with his arm around Caroline, both beaming with pride, and Lily cradled between them, giggling with uncontained joy. The image is undeniable proof of their bond, but even now, the officer struggles to shake off his initial assumptions. This still doesn't explain why she screamed, Daniels mutters, though the conviction in his voice is weakening. Before anyone can respond, Lily's voice breaks through the tension. We were just playing, she says, her voice cracking but full of sincerity. She steps forward, holding onto Marcus's leg. Daddy was chasing me like we do at home. I was laughing. I wasn't scared. Why do you think he's a bad guy? Her eyes, wide and innocent, stare up at Officer Daniels with a mixture of confusion and fear that slices through the remaining doubt like a blade. Daniels blinks, momentarily taken aback by the child's honesty. He looks back at Marcus, then at Ms. Callahan, whose expression is now one of barely concealed fury. The onlookers are beginning to murmur amongst themselves again, but this time, the tone has shifted. I think the girl's telling the truth, one person says. This whole thing's a misunderstanding, adds another. But it's more than just a misunderstanding. Marcus knows it's a symptom of something deeper, something that's been festering in the shadows of society for far too long. He watches as Officer Daniels' expression slowly shifts from stern suspicion to reluctant acceptance, but Marcus knows that acceptance is tainted with the lingering residue of prejudice. I see that you're her father, Daniels finally says, his voice begrudging as he hands the photo back. But in my line of work, I can't ignore situations like this. We have to err on the side of caution when a child's involved. Ms. Callahan doesn't let him finish. Err on the side of caution? Or err on the side of your bias, she snaps. Because this caution was nothing but a rush to judgment. You had no reason to suspect him other than how he looks. You're the problem here, Officer Daniels. Not this father, not this child. The officer opens his mouth to respond, but the words seem to die in his throat. The crowd has turned against him now, and he knows it. Marcus can see the conflict playing out in the man's eyes, a battle between defending his actions and facing the truth of what's really going on. But it isn't just about this one confrontation. Marcus knows this moment is only a small skirmish in a larger fight, a fight he's been waging silently for years. He can feel Lily's eyes on him, seeking comfort, seeking understanding. He bends down, cupping her face gently in his hands. It's okay, baby. We're going to be fine. Lily nods, tears still shining in her eyes. Marcus straightens and faces the officer once more. I understand you have a job to do, he says, his voice firm but composed. But understand this, you judged me before you even knew anything about me. That's the real danger here. Officer Daniels looks down, a flicker of guilt crossing his face. Miss Callahan steps forward, her voice ice cold. This ends here. You've humiliated this family enough. Walk away, Daniels. The officer hesitates, then finally nods, signaling to the backup officers to stand down. The tension begins to ease, but the damage has already been done. The crowd starts to disperse, the whispers fading as people realize there's nothing sensational left to see. Marcus can feel the exhaustion settling in, the adrenaline finally giving way to a profound weariness. As Officer Daniels steps back, Marcus knows the situation is diffused for now, but the real conflict, the one simmering beneath the surface of society, is far from over. As the crowd thins out, the weight of what just transpired lingers like a storm cloud. Marcus picks up Lily, holding her close as she buries her face in his shoulder. Her small frame shudders with quiet sobs, each one tearing at his heart. He gently strokes her hair, whispering reassurances she's barely able to hear over the buzzing remnants of tension that hang in the air. Miss Callahan watches Officer Daniels walk away, his shoulders tense as he mutters into his radio, calling off the backup. Her expression is a mix of satisfaction at having won this battle and fury that it had to happen in the first place. I'll be filing a formal complaint, she says sharply, her words directed at no one in particular, but intended for the officer's retreating figure. This isn't over, Daniels. But for Marcus, it's not MS. Callahan's words or the officer's departure that occupy his thoughts, it's the look in Lily's eyes. Even as she calms down, her confusion is palpable. She pulls back slightly, her tear-streaked face full of questions. Daddy, she begins hesitantly, her voice trembling, why did he think you were a bad guy? Marcus's throat tightens. He's dreaded this conversation for years, hoping to shield her from the harsher realities of the world for as long as possible. But here it is, staring him in the face. He swallows hard, searching for the right words. It's complicated, sweetheart, he starts, but even as the words leave his mouth, he knows it's not enough. Sometimes people judge others because of what they look like, without really knowing them. But that's not fair, Lily says, her brows furrowing in a mix of sadness and frustration. You're my daddy. Why would they think you're bad? How do you explain to a 5-year-old that some people see danger where there is none? That the color of his skin alone was enough for that officer to jump to the worst possible conclusion? Marcus's thoughts whirl, and before he can respond, MS. Callahan steps in, her voice gentle but firm. Lily, there are people in this world who don't understand that families come in all shapes, sizes, and colors. They see something they don't expect, and instead of asking questions, they make wrong decisions. But you know what? They're wrong. Your daddy loves you more than anything in the world, and no one can take that away. Lily nods slowly, but the confusion in her eyes hasn't fully cleared. Marcus can see that this moment has planted a seed of doubt, a tiny crack in the trust she has in the world's fairness. It's a crack he knows will widen over time as she grows up and begins to see the world for what it really is, a place where people like him are often viewed through the lens of suspicion first and humanity second. As they begin to leave the park, the memory of Caroline comes rushing back. Her voice, so vivid in his mind, echoes from the past. It had been a warm summer evening. The sun dipped low, casting an amber glow over their cozy living room. Caroline sat cross-legged on the couch, her fingers absent-mindedly tracing patterns on Lily's baby blanket. "You know we'll have to talk to her about it one day, right?" she'd said softly, glancing at Marcus with concern. "I know," Marcus replied, though his voice carried a reluctance he couldn't quite hide. "I just wish we could keep her in a bubble a little longer. She doesn't need to know how ugly the world can be." Caroline sighed, her gaze distant. "The world's going to show her, whether we're ready or not. But she needs to hear it from us first, hear that love and family are what matter, no matter what anyone else says." She reached out and took his hand, squeezing it gently. "We'll face it together. When the time comes, we'll be ready." But that time had come much sooner than Marcus ever anticipated, and now he was alone in navigating it. Caroline's sudden illness had taken her in a matter of months, leaving Marcus to figure out how to be both the protector and the guide for their daughter. He'd promised her that night that he'd prepare Lily for the world, but no matter how much he thought about it, nothing could have prepared him for the look in Lily's eyes today. The flashback fades as they reach their car, Ms. Callahan walking alongside them. She's still simmering with anger, but there's a protective warmth in the way she glances at Marcus and Lily. "Let's get you both home," she says, her tone softening. They drive in silence for a few minutes, but the tension from earlier still lingers, thick and unshakable. Finally, Ms. Callahan speaks up. "Marcus, you know we're going to push back against this, right? This was blatant racial profiling. Daniels needs to be held accountable." "I know," Marcus replies, his voice low. "But I'm more worried about what today did to Lily. How do I fix this for her? How do I make her understand that she doesn't have to be afraid every time someone looks at us like that?" Ms. Callahan takes a deep breath. "You keep doing what you're doing, loving her, protecting her, and showing her that people's ignorance doesn't define who you are or what your family is. But today, this is why we keep fighting. So she doesn't have to keep carrying this with her." Marcus nods, but the weight on his shoulders feels heavier than ever. They pull up to his apartment building, and he thanks Ms. Callahan as she leaves them with a supportive smile and a promise to follow up. Inside their home, Marcus sits Lily down on the couch. Her eyes are puffy from crying, but she's calmer now, clutching her favorite stuffed animal for comfort. He kneels beside her, brushing a strand of hair from her face. "We're going to be okay, Lily. I know today was scary, but you're safe with me. Always. Promise?" she asks, her voice tiny but filled with hope. "Promise," Marcus replies, pulling her into a hug. As he holds her close, he knows that keeping that promise means confronting a world that sees him as a threat, no matter how much love he carries in his heart. But for Lily, he'll keep fighting, no matter how heavy the burden becomes. The next few days are a blur for Marcus. Word of the incident in the park spreads rapidly, partly due to the crowd's footage circulating on social media and partly because Ms. Callahan doesn't let it slide. Calls start coming in, from reporters, from concerned friends, even from civil rights groups looking to amplify the story. It's exactly the kind of attention Marcus has always tried to avoid, preferring to keep his private life private. But now, privacy isn't an option. Lily, thankfully, is too young to fully grasp the firestorm brewing around them, but she notices the subtle shifts, how her dad spends more time on the phone, how the normally peaceful routine of their home has been interrupted by tension and hushed conversations. She clings to him more often now, seeking reassurance that things are still normal. But things aren't normal. Marcus knows that the moment he receives a call from the police precinct asking him to come down and clarify a few details about the incident. The tone is polite but firm, leaving no room for negotiation. Ms. Callahan insists on going with him, and he agrees. He knows better than to walk into a situation like this alone. As they arrive at the precinct, the atmosphere is thick with unspoken tension. Officer Daniels is there, along with his commanding officer, a man with graying hair and a weary expression who introduces himself as Captain Rivers. Mr. Hale, thank you for coming in, Captain Rivers begins, his voice carefully neutral. We'd like to resolve this matter and ensure that all parties are on the same page. Miss Callahan doesn't waste time. Let's be clear from the start, this meeting is not about justifying Officer Daniels' behavior. We're here to address the blatant racial profiling that occurred and discuss the repercussions. Captain Rivers visibly stiffens at her words. Miss Callahan, we take any allegations of misconduct seriously, but I'd like to remind everyone that Officer Daniels was responding to what he believed was a potential child abduction. His actions, while perhaps misguided, were in line with protocol. Marcus can't stay silent any longer. Protocol, he echoes, his voice carrying a sharp edge. Since when does protocol involve assuming the worst based solely on someone's appearance? He didn't see a father and daughter playing in the park, he saw a black man and a white child and immediately jumped to the worst possible conclusion. Officer Daniels shifts uncomfortably in his seat, but he doesn't speak. His silence only fuels Marcus's frustration. You judged me before I even had a chance to explain who I was. You scared my daughter. Do you even understand the damage you've done? Or is this just another day on the job for you? Daniels finally speaks up, but his tone is defensive. I was just doing my job. The child screamed, and I acted on instinct. I had to make sure she was safe. Miss Callahan leans forward, her eyes blazing. And that's the problem, your instinct is laced with bias. You didn't see a potential danger, you saw what your prejudices told you to see. If it had been a white man with a black child, would you have reacted the same way? We both know the answer. The room falls into a heavy silence as the weight of her words hangs in the air. Captain Rivers clears his throat, trying to regain control of the conversation. Look, this isn't about race. It's about ensuring safety. Marcus lets out a bitter laugh, shaking his head. It's always about race. You can dress it up in whatever language you want, but at the end of the day, people like me are always going to be seen as a threat first and human second. That's the reality you refuse to see. Captain Rivers opens his mouth to respond, but Ms. Callahan cuts him off. We're not here to debate what you're willing to acknowledge. We're here to discuss accountability. Officer Daniels needs to undergo bias training, and we expect a formal apology from your department for how this situation was handled. The captain's expression hardens. We'll consider your request, but I need to be clear, we're not admitting fault without a thorough internal review. Marcus feels a flash of anger rise within him. This is exactly what he'd feared, bureaucratic stonewalling, wrapped in layers of excuses. But before he can speak, Ms. Callahan places a hand on his arm, a subtle signal to let her handle this. She narrows her gaze at Captain Rivers. We're beyond internal reviews. This incident is already public, and the narrative is clear. Your department is under scrutiny, and any delay or refusal to take responsibility only makes things worse for you. We're prepared to escalate this legally and publicly if necessary. The threat lingers in the air, and Marcus can see the conflict playing out in Captain Rivers' eyes. On one hand, he clearly wants to protect his officer and maintain the department's image. On the other, he knows that the optics of this situation are damaging, and pushing back could make things even worse. After a long moment, Captain Rivers sighs and nods. We'll proceed with the recommended training for Officer Daniels and issue a statement acknowledging that the situation was mishandled. But I need assurances that you won't take this any further. Ms. Callahan's expression softens, just slightly. If your department follows through on these actions, we'll consider this matter resolved. But make no mistake, we'll be watching to ensure this doesn't happen again. The tension in the room begins to ease, though it's clear that no one is truly satisfied. Officer Daniels looks conflicted, but he offers a stiff nod in Marcus's direction. I'm sorry if my actions caused you and your daughter distress, he says, though his tone lacks sincerity. It's an apology born more from obligation than genuine understanding. Marcus looks Daniels square in the eye, choosing his words carefully. I accept your apology, but that doesn't erase the impact of what happened. You need to think about the assumptions you make, because they could ruin someone's life, or worse. Daniels looks away, his discomfort obvious, but Marcus doesn't press further. He said what he needed to say, and for now, that's enough. The meeting wraps up quickly after that, with the necessary formalities exchanged. As Marcus and Ms. Callahan leave the precinct, stepping out into the crisp afternoon air, there's a sense of uneasy resolution. They've won this battle, but it's a hollow victory, one that only highlights how much further there is to go. As they walk back to the car, Ms. Callahan glances at Marcus. You okay? She asks, her tone softening with concern. Marcus exhales slowly. I'm okay. Just tired. Tired of having to explain why I'm not a threat. Tired of knowing that this isn't the last time something like this will happen. Ms. Callahan nods, understanding in her eyes. You shouldn't have to, but that's the world we live in. The fight continues, and you're not alone in it. Marcus offers a faint smile. Thanks for having my back in there. Always, she replies. But remember, the best way to fight this isn't just in meetings like that. It's in showing Lily, every day, that love and family are stronger than the ignorance we face. Marcus's smile widens, this time with a touch of warmth. Yeah. That's what I'm going to focus on. As they drive away, the city's busy streets blur by, but Marcus's thoughts remain clear. He's heading home to Lily, ready to be the father she needs him to be, strong, loving, and unwavering in the face of a world that doesn't always see him for who he truly is. The fight may not be over, but in the end, his love for his daughter is what gives him the strength to keep going. The next morning dawns quietly, sunlight spilling through the curtains of Marcus's apartment. The warmth of the new day contrasts sharply with the turbulence of the previous one, but the events linger like a shadow, subtle but persistent. Marcus wakes to find Lily snuggled up beside him, having crawled into his bed sometime during the night. Her peaceful face, nestled against her stuffed animal, reminds him why he pushes through the exhaustion, the frustration, and the uncertainty. For her, he'd carry the weight of the world. Carefully slipping out of bed to avoid waking her, Marcus heads into the kitchen, where the smell of fresh coffee already fills the air. Ms. Callahan had insisted on spending the night in the guest room, not wanting to leave Marcus and Lily alone after such a harrowing day. She's seated at the table, scrolling through her phone, and looks up as Marcus enters. Morning, she says, offering a tired smile. Morning, Marcus replies, pouring himself a cup and taking a seat across from her. They sit in comfortable silence for a moment, the only sounds being the hum of the city outside and the faint clatter of cutlery as Ms. Callahan spreads butter on her toast. Finally, she clears her throat, breaking the quiet. So, the precinct issued their statement late last night. It's standard PR language, acknowledging the situation, promising a review of procedures, and mentioning Officer Daniels' participation in bias training, she says, her voice edged with cynicism. Marcus nods, unsurprised. It's a start, I guess. But I'm not holding my breath that it'll change much. It feels like every time something like this happens, there's a lot of talk but not enough action. I hear you, Ms. Callahan agrees. But the fact that they were pressured into making any statement at all is a sign that public scrutiny works. You may not see it immediately, but the ripple effect is real. You and Lily won't have to face this alone. Marcus takes a sip of his coffee, letting her words sink in. It's true, having people like Ms. Callahan and others who reached out in support makes a difference. But it also highlights just how much work remains to be done. He thinks about how to protect Lily from the world's harsh realities while also preparing her for them. It's a delicate balance, one that weighs heavily on his mind. The quiet morning is interrupted by the sound of tiny feet padding across the floor. Lily appears in the doorway, rubbing sleep from her eyes and clutching her stuffed animal. "Daddy," she mumbles, her voice still groggy, "can we have pancakes?" Marcus's face lights up with a smile. "Pancakes sound like the perfect way to start the day. What do you say we make them together?" Lily nods eagerly, her earlier worries seemingly forgotten for the moment. As they gather ingredients and start mixing batter, the kitchen fills with the comforting sounds of laughter and sizzling butter. For a little while, life feels normal again, simple, joyful, and free from the burdens of the outside world. But as they sit down to eat, the conversation inevitably circles back to what happened the day before. Lily looks up from her plate, her expression more thoughtful than usual. "Daddy, is it always going to be like this? Are people always going to think you're bad just because of how you look?" The question hangs in the air, heavy and poignant. Marcus sets his fork down, meeting her gaze with a mixture of pride and sadness. He takes a deep breath before answering, knowing how important his words are in shaping her understanding of the world. "Not everyone will, sweetheart. But some people might. And when they do, it's not your fault, or mine. It's because they don't know better, and they haven't learned to see what really matters, who we are on the inside, the love we share as a family." He reaches out, taking her small hand in his. "But what's important is that we never let their ignorance stop us from being who we are or loving each other. That's our strength." Lily nods slowly, seeming to absorb his words, though it's clear the concept is still forming in her young mind. "I don't like it," she murmurs, her eyes filling with quiet determination. "I'm going to tell people that they're wrong if they think you're not the best daddy in the whole world." Marcus feels a lump rise in his throat, and he smiles, squeezing her hand. "You do that, baby girl. And I'll be right there with you, every step of the way." Miss Callahan, who has been listening quietly from the other side of the table, wipes a tear from her eye, touched by the exchange. "You're doing an incredible job, Marcus," she says softly. "Raising Lily in a world that can be so unjust, but still teaching her love and resilience, that's no small feat." Marcus nods, gratitude and determination mixing within him. It's hard, but she's worth every bit of it. As the day goes on, the world outside continues moving with its usual hustle and bustle. For Marcus and Lily, it's a day of healing and bonding. They spend the afternoon drawing pictures, reading books, and enjoying the small but significant moments that remind them of what really matters. The incident in the park hasn't been forgotten, and it never fully will be. But Marcus knows that this is just one chapter in their lives, one of many where they'll face challenges together. They've weathered the storm, and while the fight against prejudice and bias continues, so does the strength of their bond. Later that evening, as Marcus tucks Lily into bed, she wraps her arms around his neck, whispering, "I love you, Daddy." "I love you too, Lily," Marcus whispers back, his heart swelling with pride. And nothing in this world will ever change that. As he closes her door and heads to bed himself, Marcus allows himself a moment of quiet reflection. The world may not always be kind or fair, but with love, resilience, and the support of those who believe in justice, he knows they'll find their way through whatever comes next. The fight isn't over, but it's one he's ready to face, with his daughter by his side, and love guiding the way. Several weeks have passed since the incident in the park, and life has slowly returned to a new normal for Marcus and Lily. The attention surrounding their story has died down, and while Marcus is grateful for the peace, he knows that the fight for justice is never truly over. Conversations about bias training and systemic change continue in the background, and Ms. Callahan keeps him updated on the progress within the precinct. But Marcus's focus remains on what matters most, raising Lily with the love and guidance she needs to grow into a strong, confident, and compassionate person. One Saturday morning, they find themselves back in Central Park, this time in a quieter corner where children's laughter drifts from a nearby playground. Lily runs ahead, her carefree giggles filling the air as she chases after a colorful kite. Marcus watches her, a smile tugging at his lips. For all the pain and struggle they've faced, moments like these remind him of the joy that can still flourish even in a world marred by prejudice. But even as they enjoy this moment, Marcus remains vigilant. He knows the world hasn't changed overnight, and that they'll likely face similar challenges in the future. But now, there's a sense of preparedness, a readiness to confront whatever comes with grace and strength. A familiar voice calls out, interrupting his thoughts. Marcus. Lily. It's Miss Callahan, walking toward them with a wide smile. She's holding a stack of papers, clearly fresh from a morning of meetings. I thought I'd find you two here. Lily runs over, waving excitedly. Miss Callahan. Look at my kite. She shows off her creation, the vibrant colors fluttering in the breeze. Miss Callahan kneels down to admire it. It's beautiful, just like you, she says warmly before turning to Marcus. I have some news. The department made the bias training mandatory for all officers, and they're considering expanding it citywide. It's not everything, but it's a start. Marcus nods, appreciation and resolve in his eyes. It's more than we had before. Progress is progress. Miss Callahan straightens up and hands Marcus a flyer. There's a community event next month, a panel on racial justice and family advocacy. They'd love for you to speak. People need to hear your voice. Marcus studies the flyer for a moment, thinking about the impact he could have by sharing his story. I'll be there, he finally says, a sense of purpose settling in. As they continue enjoying the day, a quiet strength lingers between them, a shared understanding that the fight isn't just about what happened in the park. It's about shaping a better world for Lily, one where she can run, play, and be free without the shadow of prejudice looming over her. And as the sun dips lower in the sky, casting long golden rays across the park, Marcus knows they're moving forward. The journey is far from over, but they're walking it together, one step, one day, one act of courage at a time.